You're listening to episode 149, Pushing Through the Struggle to Overcome Fears with Tom Leveen. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm so grateful to have you tuning in. And today we're going to be joined by author Tom Leveen. Before we get into it, I just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Navni. Navni is the top-ranked anonymous writing website in the world. Navni provides free wellness resources and low-cost online therapy services to help people cope with various levels of emotional distress. Write anonymously, feel better at novni.com. So Tom is an author of mostly young adult fiction novels, and he's written on themes surrounding PTSD and depression. And Tom joins us today to talk about how he's been able to release fears that developed after experiencing trauma growing up, in spite of still continuing to struggle with some of the after effects of that trauma. In particular, he's going to talk about the physical and emotional abuse that he experienced growing up, and how he didn't realize it wasn't normal because otherwise he came from a supportive home. He's also going to share about an assault that happened when he was 19 and how that re-traumatized him. And he's going to talk about his experience of dealing with panic disorder that kept him in the house most of the time for 5 years and what allowed him to start leaving his home again. And he's going to talk about his struggle with issues related to self-worth and also the things that help him manage depression and PTSD symptoms, and how important the support of others has been for him, and the importance that having a professional diagnosis has been for him as well. And he's going to talk about the difference between owning a diagnosis and being identified by it. And he's also going to talk about the books that he's written, and also a little bit about his theater background and the double-edged sword of being a performer. Now, while Tom speaks very candidly about what he still struggles with as a result of the trauma that he experienced, I think you'll be inspired by the work that he's done and continues to do to heal, and how he shows us that we don't have to be defined by a diagnosis. And so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into this one, and I'll go bring Tom on. Tom, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So I came across an article you wrote for Tiny Buddha entitled Take Back Your Power, Owning and Releasing Trauma and Fear. And I'll have that linked up in the show notes for anyone listening who wants to check it out. And in that article, you shared about how you had experienced physical and emotional abuse growing up, and also an incident that occurred a little later on, and how you struggle with PTSD, and also the things that have helped you in your healing journey. And in reading through the comments, I could see how it was helpful to the readers. And so I wanted to have you on here to share your story with my audience. And what I'd like to do here, Tom, is have you start us out by sharing with us what you'd like us to know about what you experienced growing up, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds great. Yes.
Yeah, so, just kind of take a few minutes and share with us a summary of what you experienced.
Okay, sure. So I am the youngest of 7 altogether. My parents were both married and divorced once with kids on either side, and then got married and had me. So I'm sort of an only, but not technically. So I've got a bunch of half brothers and sisters on either side. The next youngest sibling is, I want to say, about 10 years older than I am. So it was pretty much, growing up, it was just me and my parents for the most part. And there was, and even to this day, there was a lot that they did very well. They're very altruistic people. They're very involved in, nonprofit work and helping organizations and things like that. But one of the things that was true then and is still true all these decades later is that our family was very much everything's fine. No, be quiet. Everything's okay. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Make sure nobody outside of the house thinks that, or even inside the house for that matter, should ever think anything is wrong. that's just sort of the veneer that we had, and I very much lived up to that then and still do to this day. I'm still trying to work on that. My wife comes from the other end of the spectrum, where in her family emotions were good and they were encouraged and they were allowed to express themselves and things like that. And as a result, they've got a very healthy family, which was great.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, it's difficult when you feel like you can't express yourself, and you have to kind of hold back, and not be true to who you are.
yes, for sure. Now they, before I get into the really awful parts, I will, in their defense, I will say that they were very encouraging of the things that I was pursuing. I was a creative kid. My background is in theater and in writing, and they were encouraging of that and supportive of that and everything, which is great. So yay. But early on, very very early on, there were definitely some things that happened um, that were just that were abusive, and it took many many years to accept that, because I think a lot of us who have been through these things, and there are a lot of us who have in one way or another, I've come to learn, um, they happen when we're young and we think about it and then think, well, I guess that's just how it is. And we need to have somebody come alongside us at some point, hopefully, in our lives and point out, no, that's not normal. No, that's not okay. And you should probably really, do some investigative work into this.
Yeah,
So
you
the
don't
two,
necessarily realize that when you're going through it.
no, you can't. You really can't. I ended up later in life getting into early literacy, and that a big part of that was brain development and things like that for children 0 to 5. And the stuff that I learned in the process of doing that was like, oh my gosh, wow, the stuff I didn't know about myself as a kid was just amazing.
Hmm.
Um, so the two examples, and I give these examples in the article, and that's all they are, is examples. There were other things, but these are kind of the two to set the tone of where things went in my childhood. Was we had my dad was an avid gardener, and he kept chickens in the backyard. And for whatever reason, I don't know, 3 maybe 4 at the outside. He was upset about something I had done and threw me into the chicken coop and closed the door. I was completely naked and just freaking out, screaming my head off. And I remember very vividly, like literally jumping up and down and screaming, and no one's coming to get me out of here. Um, and another, more than once, my mom took. I don't know what what word I should use. It was shit. I'm gonna say shit, and rubbed it in my face.
Mm.
So that those are the two kind of things I use as examples. Um, Things that if I came home, I have 2 children now, I have a 7-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and I think about coming home someday and seeing anybody, whether it was my wife or other family or anyone, doing to my kids what my parents did to me. Like, no,
Hmm.
how how strongly can I say that's going to stop right now? You know what I mean? Um, so that was pretty tough, to say the least. But again, I didn't realize it for many 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 years. Um, so that's kind of where I was coming from initially, and that definitely, even as a younger kid, I had major anger issues, not so much in terms of frequency, but severity. So when I lost it bad. And that's still something I'm struggling with. And it wasn't until, man, 4 or 5 years ago that I was diagnosed professionally with depression, and that was where that was coming from. Because I think we have this cultural idea, this American idea of depression is you stay in bed all day and eat ice cream and watch Price is Right, and you don't do anything else,
Hmm.
um, and that
That's not the
happens.
whole picture.
That is not the whole picture, and I rarely, if ever, have been in that situation. Mine is rooted in this deep, deep sadness and grief that I keep inside, because you don't want anybody to know anything's wrong, and then it just blasts out, at the worst possible time. So I was already dealing with that. And then when I was, I think, 19, it was 1994, I think, some friends and I were going into a parking lot of a friend's apartment complex where we've been playing games or whatever. And this other group of guys showed up and they just jumped us, and there was literally no reason for it. They didn't take any money. They didn't call us names or anything. Like, they were just a bunch of dudes looking for a fight. They found us, and that was it. And my friends and I were not those guys, but that wasn't something that we did. So we just got dropped. It was terrible. And I mean, I could go through and give you the exact details of every single step, every breath of that experience. But one of the things that has haunted me really, for all these decades since then, was that I didn't do anything about it. I literally, no exaggeration, I stood still with my hands in my pockets and watched a guy come toward me with his fist raised and just sat there and let him hit me. Um, and that's tough. That is a tough thing to deal with. um, Part of that I've learned, and in the intervening years, is we seem to focus again. There's like this cultural idea of fight or flight, but we don't talk about freeze. And freeze is very much a part of fight or flight. Also, those are kind of the three biological things that human beings do when faced with that kind of stressor. So that was a natural thing to do, is to not move, because I had never experienced anything like this before. But the other half of it that, again, I didn't realize until relatively recently, was I honestly didn't think I was worth defending. Like, why should I defend myself? Like,
Mm.
clearly I am, without value. I should probably just accept this, which is, again, such a terrible thing.
And that's the thing, right? I mean, when you've already gone through some trauma and you haven't worked through that yet, it's so easy to get re-traumatized, because
Oh
we're
yeah,
in that place where we don't feel like we're deserving of defending ourselves or sticking up for ourselves, right?
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Which I didn't understand at the time. Um, but it's, yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true.
And then
Um,
it just compounds the issue.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And being, I don't know if it's being 19 or a guy or whatever. It's, well, I'm all right. It's cool, whatever. Um, and even honestly, the first several months after it happened, like, I remember waking up the next morning being like, wow, I got my ass kicked last night. Crazy. Okay. And didn't really bother me. Wasn't that big a deal. Like, okay, it happened, and move on. All right.
Hmm.
6 months later or so, I was in a different parking lot. Stay away from parking lots, kids. Um, at a community college where I was working, and I was walking to my car. The battery had died, and it was just me, and there was nobody else there. And this car full of guys comes roaring into the parking lot, starts doing donuts around me, and this guy leans his head out the window and screams he's going to kick my ass. So I just kept walking. I didn't say anything. I'm like, I have no idea what to do. So I just kept walking, and they didn't do anything. Like, that's all that happened. They yelled this thing and then drove away, and that was the end of it. Nothing physically happened to me. I drove home, got to my room, and as soon as I got into my bedroom, I collapsed on the floor, and didn't move for, I honestly do not know how long. It may have been 5 minutes. It might have been 5 hours. I don't know. I thought I was dying. I thought I was having a heart attack. I didn't know what was going on. And that was the beginning of my panic disorder that then kept me in the house for about 5 years. I could go out during the day if I had very specific safe places that I could go to, like my job or the one 7-Eleven where I could buy the cigarettes or whatever, things like that. But that was it. And other than that, I stayed home. I stayed locked inside. I lost friends. I lost girlfriends. It was just, and I didn't care. I thought I didn't care anyway. And that went on for, yeah, about 5 years, before things kind of started to finally turn around. So those are the two sort of main things that brought me here to where I am today.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can definitely hear how impactful that was on your life at that time, and
Hmm.
you've touched upon some of the ways in which you were affected already. So, with um, the anger issues, and then having the panic attacks, being having to stay inside. I mean, what other things were you struggling with at this time?
Um, Even still, I think a lot of it is just worthlessness. Like, I don't count. There has been a whole raft of various self harm issues that I've had in the past, whether it was cutting or punching, hitting, anything like that. Um, and that's that. Yeah, self-injury type of stuff, the negative tapes that people talk about, the tapes that play in our head, are just so colossally negative, and the kinds of things that, again, if somebody said them to my kid, I would be furious, but it's okay if I say them to me, you know? Um, and it's this kind of thing that I don't say to other people. I don't say these things to my children or my wife or my family or anything like that. But the way I treat myself is just awful, absolutely awful. And if I was doing it to anybody else, there would be an uproar, rightfully so. And I think we get stuck in this thing of, whether that's what I deserve or that's all that I'm worth, or it's different if it's me talking to me. And like, no, it's not. It's still bad, and it's abuse. It's still abuse. It's just
Mm-hmm.
self abuse,
Right.
and it's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we're saying, I mean, it all comes from, you know, not feeling worthy, not
Yeah,
feeling deserving, not feeling good enough. And we do
yeah,
these things to ourselves, we say these things to ourselves. And yes, we're now, the abuse from the other person has stopped, but now we're the ones abusing ourselves.
yes, yeah, exactly. And I, to this day, and I'm never going to know the answer to this, but it finally occurred to me that something happened to my parents also. Um, I'll never know what it was, but you don't just like wake up one day and start doing these things to children. Like
Hmm.
something had to have happened to them, um, that I'll never know, which is kind of too bad. I would love to know what they went through, just for some context. But my wife and I were just talking about this the other day, and my typical full-time job is I'm an author. I've written 9 novels, and those are all out with Random House, Simon and Schuster, and whatever. And so, by any metric you want to apply, I should be like, I'm successful and I've made it, and look at all these great things that I've done. But I cannot see it that way. All I can see is, yeah, but you didn't do this and you didn't do that. And my wife said the other day, you could be a #1 best-selling New York Times author for months, and you still wouldn't think that you'd accomplished anything or that you'd done anything. And I was like, nope, because no, uh, that's not how it works. And it's tough because, and I don't know if other people find themselves doing this also, but then it becomes this quest for this unattainable goal or metric or accomplishment or whatever, only it's not going to be there. You're going to get there, and because publishing a book was supposed to be the thing. That's when I started. Was I just want to write a book and see it in a bookstore. Okay, cool. And then I did that, and then I did it 8 more times, and it's still, I suck. It's an awful little sand trap.
Hmm. Yeah. Now take us back to, so you said that, you were pretty much, stuck in your home for 5 years.
Hmm.
What then kind of shifted for you to be able to start leaving your home again?
There are two things that kind of come to mind about that, and not that I necessarily recommend either one of them, but this is what happened to me. Because, like I said, after a while, my friends stopped hanging out. They did their best, but they're 19, 20. Also, they don't know how to deal with this any more than I do. They're not equipped or trained in how to deal with someone who has experienced this kind of trauma, right? So I certainly don't blame them for that time period. But at one point, one of my friends came over, and he is now a shape of things to come. He's a combat flight medic in the army, and he jumps out of helicopters and goes and saves people. So I guess he always had this part in him. But he came over this one particular night and said, well, you know what? There's this club, this dance club I'm going to go to, and you're going to come with me. And I was like, no, I'm not. That's danger. Bad people are there. He's like, no, you're pretty much coming. I'm going to either carry you or you can come on your own. But either way, that's what's going to happen. And for some reason, just looking at him is like he meant it. He was going to physically carry me out of the house if he had to. So I was like, okay, but I have to drive. And he's like, cool, here's the keys. And so I went. For the first time in years, I went out on a weekend night for just a couple hours to this club, and I was terrified. But I had my friend there who's like, nothing's getting through me to get to you. That's not going to happen, And that was an important shift. Again, I'm not saying that's necessarily going to be everybody's journey. That's just what happened to work for me. That I don't know why it was him, why that particular night, why that particular event, but that was kind of the first little step outside my comfort zone, which was great. Um, in retrospect, because I think about this with my own children, like what would I have done if it were my kid? Now, when this happened, when we got jumped, I came home and, and I'm bleeding and the bruises and everything, got kicked in the face and all this, terrible stuff. And I cannot, literally, my dad's only response was, well, that's what happens at apartments. It's dangerous, bad places. Like, that was it. No,
Mm,
should we call the cops? No, are you okay? Do you need a doctor? Like, it was, that's what he said. Um, and then for the next several years, I mean, they noticed I was home, but there was never any like, hey, are you okay? Like, why aren't you hanging out at Matt's house anymore? None of that ever happened. Um, and I feel like if something like that were to happen to my kid, let it go for a few weeks and then like, hey man, come with me. We're going to drive around the block real quick. We're just going to drive around the block and we're just going to do 1% better at whatever rate that needs to happen. I think that would be one potential way to do that. But in my case, it just happened to be this sort of throw me into the deep end of the pool and see if I could swim. And I did. Not overnight, but that was one victory. Um, and after a while, um, it started to become more intentional. Like, I'm going to walk to the end of my street. Okay, did that. Great. Okay, now I'm going to ride my bike to 7-Eleven. Okay, did that. Now I'm going to I'm going to go see a movie with my friends. I'm going to come right home because it's going to be late and dark and I'm scared, but I'm going to do that. Uh, and so after that one moment with my friend, it became these intentional stair steps, very slow, very laborious, wasn't always successful, but it was always this striving to be just a little bit more than I did, the day before, the week before, whatever. And that's kind of how it started to build the confidence to get back out. And even today, um, like I'll be out doing something at night and go get some coffee or whatever, and I will still find myself to this very day standing in a dark parking lot by my car, just kind of looking around and going, "Wow, I can do this."
mm,
Even those little reminders actually help the process continue because it could always come back, and I don't want that to happen. So the little reminders of those very small victories. There are people I feel like who, we talked about the classical depression that we talk about in our country, like, and again, yes, that exists. People can't get out of bed. So maybe for this person, it's, I'm going to get out of bed and make lunch today. Dude, that's a victory. That is a super huge thing. Congratulations. Good job. Maybe tomorrow you might even get out and make dinner too. You know what I mean? Maybe it's, I'm going to walk into my driveway and get the mail. Awesome. That's great. Those little tiny victories step by step, I think, is what helped the most.
yeah, absolutely. Because we can look at sort of that end goal and it can just seem so daunting or seem so far away. And then we just don't even want to start on that path, And so
Yeah,
it helps so much to be able to just break it down and take that next step, whatever it is, just something small, something manageable, so that you do it, and you succeed at it, and then you can build that momentum and keep going from there. And then, eventually you will get to where you want to be, and then
yeah,
you'll look back and you'll be surprised at how far you've come,
yeah.
and that's great. And I love
Always,
how,
yeah,
yeah, I love how in your case, you were very intentional about it.
yeah. It took, and again, it was not overnight. Like that story makes it seem like, oh, and then I was better. No, no, no. I was terrified, and it was rough. But it was enough of a little, nudge or whatever. Like, okay, I did something and I wasn't hurt. Okay, cool. Now I can do this and now I can do that. And it's, and to not uh, compare ourselves to other people, which I'm still terrible at doing that in my professional life and whatnot. But when it comes to this kind of thing, like, yes, maybe it looks like quote unquote everybody is out there having fun and moving on with their lives and doing great things. Well, number one, it's not everybody by any stretch of the imagination. Number two, that's their thing. You can't worry about what they are doing, whatever nebulous they is out there. Like, this is our story. This is our our life and what we're making of it. And today, I am going to do something kind to myself. Um, or for myself, maybe that's a bubble bath. Good for you. That's not what I do, but if that's your thing, great, you do that. Um, we have to treat ourselves like that. And again, I'm terrible at it. I'm still working at it. I'm a lot better than I was 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, for that matter. Um, and it's an ongoing thing. It's definitely not a destination. I don't feel like at any point I'm like, I don't have depression anymore. I don't have PTSD anymore. Like, no, I do. Okay, but I'm living with it and I'm living through it. And um, today I, did my job, and today I did this, and today I did that, and uh, that's that's the best week. Not the best. That's just something I think we can all reach for at our own pace and give ourselves permission to do it at our own pace, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What sorts of things do you do that help you to manage, depression, PTSD, things that come up for
Uh,
you?
yeah, I highly, personally, I always recommend being outside and doing any kind of physical activity. I don't care what it is. Um, somebody pointed out a couple years ago, there were during one of our many acts of mass violence that happened. Somebody pointed out, what you never hear in the reporting after an act of mass violence is you never hear about how the perpetrator was an avid outdoorsman. They never talk about how they were big into hiking or anything like that, right? There's something about being outside, being exposed to nature, whatever your environment happens to be, ocean, desert, forest, mountains, whatever, that is just good for us. I don't know why. I don't understand the biology or the evolution of it, but it is good for us to be outdoors. So I always recommend that, even if it's just your own backyard. Cool, start there. And then any kind of physical activity. I was never physically active as a kid. I mean, I was physically active. I was not athletic. Um, I hated sports. Didn't think, just thought the worst of people who did sports because they're jocks and they're terrible people and blah blah blah. Well, it turns out that's not necessarily true. um, but to do something active, and like a walk is a great place to start. Over the last couple of years, I've started getting more into like endurance events, like um, shorter triathlons, sprint triathlons are called, mud races, obstacle courses, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not there to beat anybody. I'm not there to win anything. I just go and I finish it, and I come home and say I finished it. The first thing I ever did was a marathon. I just did the whole marathon, 26 miles. And it took me, I think, 6.5 hours. Was just, I walked most of the time. And then towards the end, I kind of picked up the pace because I wanted it to look like I'd been running, although it didn't fool anybody. Um, but that's one of those things. And I don't know if other people think in these terms or not, but like for me, I can still say I finished a marathon. You can never take that away from me, no matter
Right.
what. I always have that kind of on my life resume. Um, and I don't brag about it. I don't tell everybody, oh, I did it. It's not like that, but like that's something for me that I did and I finished it. And even, I think for most, whether it's an event like that or something similar, whether it's a race or a 5K or whatever, uh, just showing up for a lot of us, that is the victory. Like I showed up and got on the starting line, and then I started going. And maybe I finished it. Maybe I didn't finish it. Maybe the van came by at the end and picked me up because I couldn't finish it. Okay, but you showed up and other people didn't. That counts. That's still a victory. So those are I mean, those two things in particular, I think, are super helpful. It's good for your body, and if it's good for your body, I think it's good for your mind. I'm starting to play more now with my diet, and what I actually eat and put into my body has changed a lot. Like I don't remember the last time I had like legit fast food. Because and the thing is about that, we all know it. You don't have to have your doctor tell you to stop eating burgers. Like, dude, we know. We if you didn't hear that by now, where have you been? Um, Eat some spinach. It's good for you. Just give it a try. Things like that. You don't have to go crazy with it, but every once in a while, have something good for you. I think that's very helpful. Uh, but I think, having said all of that, and recommending all of that, I can't say thank you enough to my wife and to her family, and having healthy people around me who are like, okay, you have this thing, cool, love you. Well, no, you don't understand, I'm so messed up. Like, yeah, love you. No, 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 I suck, I'm terrible, I did the, yeah, we know, love you. And that's it. Like, that is their starting place and their ending place. Whatever you have, whatever you've done, whatever you do, love you. That's it. um
It is
I
so crucial
want,
to have that support.
it is, I want that for like everyone on the planet. I wish everyone on earth had my mother-in-law, you know what I mean? Like, that would be so great. I'm so sorry that not all of us do, but have, whether it's family or friends, pastor, counselor, therapist, uh, club that you belong to, whatever, having one, two, 10 people, however many, who are just gonna have your back. Like, that's kind of the colloquial way to put it. Um, no matter what. I still, I'm still friends with the guys I went to high school with to this day. And, you know, right now, I could get off this call and call three, four, five people, and within 24 hours, somebody would be here, whether they're in Iowa, New York, or down the street. Somebody's going to be here, no question. That is super, super, super important. I think that those kinds of relationships save lives all the time, no exaggeration. And if people feel like they don't have that, then the other thing I would say is being a part of something that you are interested in, whether that's doing a meetup at some anything that interests you, whatever it is. And that's where we start to meet the people who, we have something in common, and you can start to build those relationships, and they're just so crucial, so absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that. I love all the things that you mentioned there that, that help you. Those are things that I rely on myself, when I'm having a rough time. And I think it's great. And there, certainly things that can help a lot of people. And, when it comes to what helps someone in their healing, I mean, it's all very individual. But those are definitely some of my favorites. Oh, that's awesome. Glad those are
Yeah.
helpful for you.
I would also, in thinking about it, the other thing I like to try to tell people, when we have these conversations, is, if you haven't yet, is to get a professional diagnosis, and to be completely transparent and honest about how you got to be where you are. Because it's not like I started seeing a doctor 5 years ago. It's just that particular doctor that I finally went to is the one who was able to unpack all this for me. I've been seeing doctors for years before that, and I'd spent time in a hospital for it, and all these things, and none of it really had any long-term impact. I'd been on the meds, I'd done, all the stuff you're supposed to do, and none of it was helping. And I didn't know why, and I was getting frustrated. And then the difference was, and maybe it was because I was older, I don't know, more mature, I don't know. Um, I finally told the entire story to this particular doctor, and that's when things really started to happen at a more accelerated rate, in terms of feeling more like I could be productive, and I could do the things that I wanted to do. Um, so if you haven't seen somebody, number one, see someone professional, get an actual diagnosis, and be open to that diagnosis. Because, for me, previously, when I heard PTSD, it was like, well, I'm not in the army, I've never been in, combat or whatever, like, I don't deserve to have PTSD. No, that's not how it works. We don't get to decide that, you know and having that professional diagnosis can really make things more clear. Things can start to have more clarity. Giving ourselves permission to have that diagnosis, and to own it, and be like, okay, this is a real thing. Um, I think that is huge. So important. And then when that sinks in, when we start to kind of make peace with, okay, this is something that this is a legitimate struggle, I'm not making this up. Um, then to not let it become the identity, and that's also hard. I've had acquaintances like that, who have a diagnosis of something, and it can be something very severe, and then suddenly that's all they are, and it's like, no, 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 you're not. This is a part of it. This is a part of you, but it's not your identity. It is. And you, it's a fine line, I suppose, but ownership and identity are two different things, and having a trained doctor, therapist, counselor, whomever, to walk through that with is so crucial, so crucial. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely important. Thank you for mentioning that.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I think, you know, understanding what it is that you have, whether it's PTSD or something else, I mean, once you are aware of it, then you can figure out how to treat it
Yeah.
point rather than just trying to guess what it is that's going on and what you're struggling with and, not being quite sure how to approach it.
Yeah, and there's still to this day, I think um, in our particular society, there are a lot of people who still kind of feel like it's some kind of a stain on their reputation, or it's something that you're not supposed to talk about, or feel, or whatever. And that's just so dangerous. And so many of us are getting hurt by ourselves, or allowing other people to hurt us by not looking into that, and being willing to like, no, I really need some help with this. Like, the quality of life that I'm living right now is not what I want it to be, and I need some help. Which is tragic, and I don't want that to happen to anybody.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to continue, as a society to remove the stigma from these
Yeah.
diagnoses so that, when someone is diagnosed with something, there's not so much shame around it, and you can actually accept the diagnosis for what it is and be able to work through it and not feel like there's something so terrible wrong with you that you have to be ashamed of it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's definitely hard, but it's also so worth it. And the idea of losing whatever precious time we have to something like this is infuriating, in kind of a good way, if that makes sense. Like, no, I've got too many things I want to do. I've got uh, too many goals, and too many great relationships to let this hold me back, if at all possible. So yeah, it's worth looking into.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, Tom, I know you've shared kind of throughout the episode about how certain things still come up for you in ways that you're still affected. How would you say you're doing today overall, though?
Oh, well, you caught me at a bad time. This past the past couple weeks have been sort of rough. I'll be perfectly honest. I tend to run in these kind of cycles of up and down. It's not quite manic depression. I don't really get mania per se, at least in the classical sense, but I definitely have these periods of like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Woo, everything's great. And then the sudden crash that'll sometimes it takes, a couple of days, and other times it's 5 or 6 days. Um, and so yeah, the last couple weeks have been kind of rough. I think I'm up on an upswing right now, and part of the reason for the upswing is, again, making intentional choices when I can. There were several days in a row here just recently, this past couple weeks, where I wasn't able to win, quote unquote. I wasn't able to make a good choice or a positive choice to make things better, because it got the best of me. All right, well, it did. Okay, and now, like, even today, something came up. There was an event I was going to go to, and I was all excited, like, oh, I'm going to do this thing. Yeah, okay, good, 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 good. And then stop, think about it, and realize, you know what? If I do this, I'm going to come home in such worse shape than I would have been otherwise. Okay, I'm not going to go. This is not something that's going to be good or healthy for me. Uh, so I asked my wife to go. So she's going to go, and everything will be great. And that was an intentional choice. That was a healthier choice for me to make. But there are times when it's hard to see um, those hard choices. And for me, trying to catch the downswing as early as possible makes a big difference. Sometimes I'm able to, and sometimes I'm not. Um, I would say, though, that overall, over the last like 4 or 5 years, taken in sum, I'm so much better, so much healthier and happier than I was prior to getting the professional help, and trying to change as much of the tapes, like we talked about. Um, but it's still there. it's it's still there, and I'm just lucky and grateful that I'm surrounded by people who will still take me in and accept me for that, and do whatever is most helpful for me. So Yeah, still struggling, but not as much as I used to, I think. Was that
Hmm.
the question? Did I answer the question?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, and I love how you have support and the different things, the tools that you mentioned that you can turn to, that
Mhm.
help you, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I'm lucky, I'm very fortunate for that. I do believe, I could be mistaken, I do believe there are resources out there for literally everyone. Some of us are in a position where that's going to be harder to find, and that's terrible. Number one, like you said, we need, as a country, we need to do much better about that also. Um, but if it feels like I don't have those resources, then start at the library. Honestly, public libraries are a wealth of information, and they are connected to the community in ways that some of us might not be. Like, start there and say, look, here's what's going on. What do I do? And oftentimes a good public librarian can really help those of us who maybe don't have the same types of resources at our fingertips the way I do. And I'm just so fortunate and grateful for that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good tip. So I know that you told us about how you're an author. Tell us about the books that you write.
So most of my books are they're shelved in young adult. They're written for kind of a high school audience, and one of the things I've been fortunate enough and blessed enough to be able to do is talk about some of these topics in those books, because this was happening when I was a kid and when I was in high school, um, and it's happening to high school students, junior high students all over the world, all over the country. Um, and so I have a couple of books that the plot might be about a kidnapping or whatever, some kind of exciting plot thing, but the themes are very much about dealing with like, I've got a book that deals specifically with PTSD and depression, although it's couched in sort of this thriller plot. The main character has these diagnoses and is in order to move forward in the story, has to find ways to deal with them. So I'm really pleased and yeah, again, fortunate to be able to, in some of the stories, talk about these things in ways that hopefully students in particular will see themselves and be like, oh, we can talk about this. Yes, you can. You can totally talk about that. And that's one of the great thing about books is, particularly for younger readers, is they can talk about what's happening in their lives by talking about the books publicly. And I've heard from many librarians and teachers who talk about that, where there'll be a kid in an English class or a book club or whatever, and they don't say anything all year. And then suddenly they read this one book and they just start talking, and they can't stop talking about this one character. And it very soon becomes clear that, okay, because they're not talking about the character, they're talking about themselves through the lens of this character. And that's fantastic. So yeah, they're all, I've got some zombies over here, and then I've got some, stuff about a party over there, all kinds of different topics, but a lot of them do bring these topics in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's great. How long have you been writing for?
My first novel came out in 2010, but I've been writing since second grade. Never stopped.
Wow.
Yeah,
So did you know
yeah.
back then that you wanted to be an author?
Yes, I did. I knew I had my second grade teacher made me. We had an assignment to write a short story, so I did. And because I was scared to death of her, she was the teacher nobody wanted. Everybody's got one. So because she was, I was terrified of her. I did what she said to do, and I rewrote this story. And she says, "Great, now take it next door and read it to the first graders." And of course, everybody loves public speaking, right? So, but I did it, and as soon as I got up there and looked up and saw this classroom full of first graders just staring at me, waiting to see what was going to happen next, I was like, I want to be up in front of people and I want to tell stories. And I've been doing that in one way, shape, or form pretty much ever since. Yeah. Whether it was theater or fiction or whatever, that's been a part of my life since I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9, I guess. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Which is another thing. If you have people listening who can identify with this, I'm a theater kid, so I was literally trained in not letting people know what was really happening. And some of my friends who have continued on similar paths, who are in some kind of public speaking or presentation, something where they're up in front of people a lot. We talk about this all the time, about how our audiences have no idea what happened before we came out there. You will never see us break down on stage or we're there to do a show, and man, we bring it. We're jazz hands, buddy. Here we go. Um, and then off stage, away from the spotlight, away from the audience, we could be having the worst day, month, or week ever, but no one's going to know. And that can be handy. In my profession, that's a handy skill to have, but it doesn't come without a cost too, because then it gets very easy to put that mask on, to put that sort of front out there, and not let people ever know that something is actually really wrong. So it's kind of a double-edged thing there, but I see it happen a lot to those of us who are in any kind of whether it's acting, musician, any kind of public performance type thing. It can be challenging. It can be very challenging.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Do you still you're still involved in theater?
I haven't done theater for about 7 years. Once my first son was born, my first child was born. No, that was the end of that. There was no more time to do
Hmm.
full productions, but I do still, as part of my early literacy stuff, I do story times 2 or 3 times a week at the various bookstores with kids 0 to 5 and their parents. And so that's a moment, for that half hour, I have to be on, and I have to be doing the show, and I have to be doing kind of this very subtle instruction on literacy and stuff like that. And I can't be up there like, I don't want to be here today. I want to be at home, and I want to hit my punching bag, or I want to do whatever it is. Like, no, for these 30 minutes, I got to be on. And so I'm going to be on, and that's what I do. Um, so it's yeah, it can be a challenge, but it's also a good thing, because now this is something I agreed to do, so I have to get out of the house. I have to go do this, and I'm helping kids learn to read. That's pretty cool, you
Yeah,
know.
that's great.
Yeah, can't argue with that. So, but it's a back and forth. It's definitely a back and forth.
Hmm. So, Tom, I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today.
Sure.
And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say, okay, so I'm going to actually steal somebody else's sort of answer for this. There's an author that I really enjoy named Rob Bell, and he's written a number of books. And kind of what he does, he writes books, and then he goes on these speaking engagement tours all throughout the country. And one of them, which I think you could probably still find on YouTube, was called "The Gods Aren't Angry." And at the end of it, the last like 10 minutes or so of this talk that he's giving, he tells a story about how he was really struggling with, um, had to be better, faster, stronger, more, making better decisions, and everybody else was just really pushing him too hard. And he had lost the joy in what he was doing, and was just really miserable. And he went out to lunch with a friend, and his friend listened to him and said, "Rob, you don't have to live like this." And Rob says, "No, I know, I know, I know. I've got plans, and here's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to take care of this." And his friend said, "Rob, you don't have to live like this." And Rob said, "No, no, no, but here's what the sun's going to come out. And here's what I'm going to do." "Rob, you don't have to live like this." And he says, his friend would just keep repeating this phrase over and over. He wouldn't say anything else other than, "You don't have to live like this," until it finally sank in. And the last time I got a chance to talk to him, I had him, I was at a book signing, and I had him write this phrase down on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that I framed and I keep in my office. "You don't have to live like this." And that's what I would tell myself. And that's what I would tell anybody who asked the question. Because my experience has been that we get into this sort of verbal trap of using phrases like, "Well, I have to do this. I need to do that." And really, if you live in a Western nation, you don't have to do whatever it is you think you do. Um, if you're coming from a place, if you're in a place, for example, where your family is traumatizing you continually, or it's a bad relationship or whatever, but it's Thanksgiving, so I have to go to Thanksgiving dinner. No, you don't. You really don't. You don't have to live like this. Um, and I think that has been one of the key phrases that has really changed my outlook and my decision making process for the better, because I kind of run everything through that filter. Like, well, I have to do X. No, I don't. I may choose to because I don't like the consequences of not doing it. That's totally fair. But really, there's not a gun to your head. You don't have to stay in that job. You don't have to stay in that abusive relationship. You don't have to keep drinking. You don't have to do whatever it is that's going on that's making you miserable and unhappy and sick. Chances are there are changes you can make. You don't have to live like this. And I think if I could go back, um, again, I don't know if quote unquote forcing me out of the house was the right choice or not. Um, I probably wouldn't have made that choice if it were me and somebody else, but I would definitely sit down with them and use that mantra over and over again. You don't have to live like this. What's a choice you can make tomorrow or right now or soon that's different than the choices you've been making, because clearly that's not working. You do have the freedom. You do have the agency to do that. For people who respond well to stories, most of us are probably familiar sort of culturally with the Hunger Games series, right? There's the movies and the books. Nobody wants to read a story where at the very beginning, during the lottery scene where all the kids are being chosen, nobody wants to read a story about the girl who stands there while her sister gets chosen and says, "Oh man, oh, that's bummer. That sucks. Damn." Like, nobody wants to read about that character. We do want to read about the character like Katniss, who says, "I volunteer. I'll go. I volunteer. I will be tribute." And that is called agency. It's having that knowledge that I can take action. It's crucial to stories. All of our favorite heroes have agency. They all make choices to take them to the next step in the story. We have that same thing. We have agency. We can choose to do whatever it is that's going to make us better. So I would sit myself down and just very calmly say, you don't have to live like this.
Yeah, I love that because we do have that choice. You know,
Mhm.
and when we've gone through some kind of trauma growing up, we're kids and this is happening to us and we're kind of trapped in that situation. We don't have that choice. That's what's taken away from
Yeah,
us. And as adults, we do have that now. So I love that.
yeah. I feel I was watching a show just last night where um, a kid was gay, and he knew he was gay, and he finally came out to his parents and they were not having it. So he left the house. And like, that's something that I wish like hell there was a way to not let that happen, to not have that relationship be destroyed, or and it happens all the time. And yet, if it's dangerous or bad or unhealthy, then okay, I'll be somebody who will say, "I got your back on that, man. I'm sorry. Don't give up. I hope there can be healing and restoration of that relationship. I really do. But if it's time, if when you're 18, it's time to go, then it's time to go. You have to do whatever is going to be best for your physical health and mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, all of it. Um, it's dicey. I know it really is, but I have to be on board with that because I've been down that road as well with my family, where there are times when I didn't talk to my family for years, and I was kind of given the right to do that and the permission to do that by my doctor. It was like, this isn't going to go well. Every time you talk, here's what happens. Like, okay, then that's something I need to not do for a while, and that's okay, and it's okay to not do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tom, before I let you go, what is the best way for people to connect with you or to find out more about what you're working on in your books and everything?
Funny you should ask. So the the first place I will send people is to my website, which is just tomleveen.com. As long as it's spelled correctly, you will find me. I am on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Although just within the last week, I have currently taken a break from that, so I have not been posting. I don't know when I'm going back, but the pages are still live and active. I'm sure, given uh, my profession, I will eventually have to go back, but I don't know when that's going to be. But the pages are still active, and so you can find me on any of those. Just again, if you search for Tom Leveen, Leveen, I will be there, and sooner or later, I will be back. But otherwise, the website's just fine.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Tom, I just want to thank you for coming on here today and for sharing your story with us and sharing with us the struggles and the things that have helped you and just being real with us today. So thank you for joining me here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I hope it was helpful.
All right, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 149. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Tom Leveen, and that's spelled Leveen, to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. So I hope you enjoyed hearing from Tom today and that this has been helpful to you in your own healing journey. If you're someone who has been diagnosed with depression or PTSD and you struggle with that, then take this away from today's episode. Own your diagnosis, own your struggles, but don't be defined by them. You are more than that, and you get to choose what that is. You have choice now, as we talked about here at the end of the episode, and you don't have to live like this. I love that mantra, and I'm glad that Tom shared that with us today. Write that down, put it somewhere you can see it every day, and let that inspire you in your journey. And be sure to come back for the next episode, and also head over to the website to grab your free copy of the Top 10 Strategies Guide for Survivors. In it, you'll find the top 10 most common strategies my podcast guests have used for overcoming the effects of past trauma. It's a great place to get started if you're looking for some strategies that can help you in your healing journey, as they have helped my guests. And you can find that at thegrassgetsgreener.com/guide, or also on the show notes page. So be sure to grab that if you haven't yet. And lastly, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And as always, have hope.